Hello gamers and welcome back. I'm Rob, of course, or Warshak if you want to call me by my in-game name, and it's about that time again where we go ahead and cover another monthly meta where we talk about the most popular and powerful decks in Hearthstone. So for those of you who are new to these kinds of videos, we talk about, again, the most popular decks, roughly meaning when you hit that ranked play button to go and play against other players on the ranked system, not casual. These are going to be basically 90 to 95% of all of the decks you're going to see. We're going to talk about the classes and all of the deck archetypes that fall under those classes. Also keep in mind that this video is posted at the beginning of every month, so it becomes more and more outdated as the month goes on. So let's say a new deck springs up 3 weeks after the start of a month. Unfortunately, this video can't cover it. It would be impossible, but that deck will be covered in the following monthly meta. So without further ado, we're going to talk about the first class, and that's going to be the Druid class, but more specifically, the Jade Golem Druid. This is definitely by far the most popular Druid decks. There are a little less popular, which I'm just going to mention because you will see them, but Jade Golem is, I want to say, 90 to 95% of basically all the Druids you're going to see, with the exception of what we're going to cover next. So, as we know with most Jade cards, it's very kind of a linear approach to what you can expect. There's no surprises here, right? Throughout the game, they're going to be playing Jade Golem, which gets bigger basically every time they play one. It starts off as a 1/1, and as we know, it grows from there. As I said, there's no surprises in this deck because this deck isn't going to be able to burst you down from 25 health or 20 health. You're fairly safe. The threat of this particular deck comes over time due to the fact it has a card called Jade Idol in it, which says basically when you play this card, shuffle 3 more copies in your deck, which allows you to never fatigue, therefore allowing you to beat basically any late game control deck through just consistently and constantly playing huge Jade Golem cards to the extent where your opponent will have no longer any removal effect abilities or creatures to kill them. They're just too many. It's infinite value, and that's where this deck really shines. Unfortunately, as good as that sounds, the deck's weakness is, of course, aggro to faster-paced mid-range decks, which will basically kill this deck before it has time to gather the pieces and the combo and be able to get the Jade Golems to a point where they can no longer be dealt with. So there is weaknesses, but there is a lot of pros to this deck. And just keep in mind when you're playing against a Druid, you kind of want to go balls deep and just give them everything you've got, because once it hits late game, you're not beating them. The other 2 decks that I kind of wanted to mention was the Kun'Combo Decks, whether they're running Malygos, which I'm showing in this particular deck list, and or the Cthulhu combo, which I'm showing in this particular deck list. The combo basically goes, they play Aviana, they play Kun the Forgotten King. From there, they have a 5/5 and a 7/7 on board, and they're back to 10 mana. And on top of that, because of Anivia's ability, says every creature you play only costs 1 mana, which means Cthulhu is 1 mana, Bran is 1 mana, and any Cthulhu buffing ability is 1 mana, or any Cthulhu buffing minion is 1 mana. So you basically go Bran into like your Dark Arakoas and your Disciple of Cthulhu. You give Cthulhu +6/+6 per 1, and then you play Cthulhu, which again is going to deal let's say 15 damage, and then it's going to battle cry to trigger twice, so you're dealing upwards of 30 plus damage. You also can expect the some people run the Panda, which can return Cthulhu to your hand and play him again, which is a more burst on top of what you already have to deal with. Also from there, the Malygos is very similar. They play spells along with Malygos, so they actually faceless manipulate the Malygos to make it do 10 spell power instead of just the original 5 that it does. So basically OTK deck. So if you see your opposing Druid drawing a lot instead of playing with Jade Golems, you can expect an OTK deck like I've listed here. So heading on over to Mage, we have the Reno Mage, which is definitely the most popular Mage by far. Tempo Mage is on the rise, but it's just still not there yet. This deck is very controlling and revolves around basically, I don't want to say exactly like the Control Warrior, where making your opponent run out of steam and fatiguing them, but it can follow that route and outvalue a ton of different decks. It also has the ability to, of course, combo the Bran with Kazakis, which is a ton of value, which is kind of how you fatigue your opponents. But on top of that, it has the Archmage combo, which you can make a bunch of fireballs. It has the Alexstrasza, so most of the time if you're dealing with your enemy minions, you're not really going face a lot, and Alexstrasza says, I really don't care if you don't do anything all game. I'm going to be able to deal 15 damage to your opponent if they're still at 30, or you could play it defensively. Let's say you haven't drawn Reno yet, and you are at 1 HP with your ice block that pops, you can drop the Alexstrasza and actually bring yourself back up to 15. So it can be used offensively and or defensively, depending on who you're playing against and what you're kind of aiming to do. Overall, super fun deck. When you're playing it, it's one of my least favorite decks to play against, but that's just me. But the deck does require, it's very hard. The deck is easy to play, but hard to master, if that makes sense. The deck, it's fairly straightforward some turns with figuring out kind of what you want to do, but thinking strategic long-term game plans against other Reno decks is kind of where the better Reno player will win. So it'll take a lot of time to learn, but it's not that hard that where if you've never played Reno, don't be scared of playing the deck. Just please don't play it against me. Moving to Tempo Mage, which is my... I definitely like this deck a lot more than the other one, just personally playing it and playing against it. You kind of... You have the ability to go control or late game with this deck due to the fact that it has Conjures, Firelands, Portals. It has a lot of draw. And it also has Rag in the deck along with Flame Strike, but it also can go with the very aggressive early game route because you have cards such as Mana Worm, Blood Mage, Sorcerer's Apprentice, the Flame Wakers, and of course the Cult Sorcerers with Azure Drakes. So as we know, turn 8 double Fireball Face always feels nice, but again can push the more controller route. But as we know, Tempo Mage is one of the quicker. I don't want to classify it at aggro. I would put it basically in between an aggro and a mid range, but it has the tendency to also, if you're really looking for the value, like I mentioned, it can definitely outvalue a Reno deck if played correctly, and our deck guide on that should be able to show you, which should be up, and all deck guides that we have out, and the deck list is what we cover. I'll put that up on the side for you guys, so if I haven't, remind me so I do that for you guys because you deserve it. Heading into the next list is going to be the Paladin, and this is the same basically Murloc Paladin that we covered in our last month's monthly meta. Unfortunately, this deck really hasn't changed a whole lot over time. It still requires you to play, the double Anyfin, but it actually has the inclusion of Finja. Last month's did too, but people are still testing Finja and seeing if it's actually that great in the deck, and it really is. It basically counts as draw if it kills a creature because it's summoning 2 Murlocs from your deck, which means you don't actually have to draw them and play them. It just plays them for free, which is huge tempo. So a lot of times you can actually just win games if Finja sticks around and is able to kill a minion or two, and they can't actually clear up the Murlocs because the deck still has a sizable amount of minions through Tyrion and Rag and Ivory Knight. So a lot of great things can happen. On top of that, due to the fact that the most recent patch, made Small Time Buccaneer and the Spirit Claws not as good, decks like this will shine more bright, or I should say brighter, because they're not basically being torn apart by a 1-drop 3/2 in an aggro deck. And unfortunately, I do see the green screen problem there, and I'm going to try to knock that out real quick. How you doing? Oh gosh, we made it worse. Okay, we're just going to do half and half. Hopefully that made it a little bit better for you guys. But basically, this deck OTKs you from playing Anyfin. It has the double War Leader, Bluegill, and a blue. As we know, the Bluegills have charge. War Leaders buff the Bluegills, and if you have 7 Murlocs, let's say 3 or 4 of them are the War Leaders, and 2, or let's say 3 or 4 of them are the Chargers. It's going to deal upwards of, I think, 32 or 34 damage is max once you've played the second Anyfin. And keep in mind that the Ivory Knights that are in the deck can also generate additional Anyfin can happens, which is basically any control. If you're opposing another control player, that's their worst nightmare, right? Is the third Anyfin can happen. So this deck does have the ability to bust out another Anyfin, which is basically just game over if the second one didn't already do it. Moving to Priest, we have, I believe, 2 Priest decks. The first one, again, being Reno. Most of the best Reno decks are the decks that have the Kazakus in it, because Kazakus and Reno together are just crazy. As we've noticed in the past, when Reno first came out, he has played a decent amount, and then the decks kind of faded because Reno by himself was just not enough to play a one-of deck. Still good decks, don't get me wrong, but with the addition of Kazakus, Cabal Courier, and all that good stuff, it just made the deck so much more powerful, and that's why, again, you see these particular classes, Mage, Priest, and Warlock, specifically running, the Reno class. So when you play Reno Priest, you're pushing more towards it being a hybrid in between, of course, Reno Kazakus and the Dragons, which is what what I've seen a lot on ladder and what I've built it as. Keep in mind, all the deck lists that I show on the side are my deck lists. I don't pull them from anywhere. This is just what if I were to play the deck, this is what I'm playing. And if you don't agree with it, you can of course change whatever you like. You don't have to. This isn't like this is not #1 legend deck. This is, you know, Warshak plays deck. Because I've seen a lot of comments like, why do you have this? Why do you have that? It's just my deck. That's what I have. And if you're questioning it, the deck guide should again be up there for you, which will hopefully answer all questions regarding the deck list. But the core of the deck is what's important. So again, with it being a Reno deck, very control-y, wanting to outlast your opponent. And again, the brand Kazakus is just one of those ways to outvalue any control class. And then through there, of course, you have the Draconoid Operative, the Corruptor, the ability to get a decent dragon with Historian. Of course, we're playing Ysera, so if you get placed against another priest, you try to bait out the Entomb from them. They entomb something, you drop Ysera, they can't deal with it, GG no re, and the reason they can't deal with it is because they have 4 attack, and priests have no ability to get rid of 4 attack minions, as we know, because Shadow Word Pain is 3 or less and Shadow Word Death is 5 or more. Looking at the Dragon Priest, again, so basically all of the one-of cards that the Reno runs, you just get rid of the other non-dragon cards and just add more dragons instead. So of course 2 Netherspite Historians, 2 Operatives, 2 Corruptors, 2 Twilight Guardians, and so on. Still runs the same, you know, Ysera and Tomb Dragonfire Potion package. So you'll find the decks are very similar in terms of like the dragons they play and sometimes the curve it gets. But I would have to say, if you're looking to play more of the dragon package, playing the Reno is not as consistent. You basically drop the consistency of having the ability to do your dragon craziness with Operative and the Historian into more Operatives, and to be able to basically have dragon synergy all the time. You replace that with being able to play Reno, Kazakus, Cabal Courier, and things of that nature. So this deck also runs a lot faster than the Reno decks because it's not as control-y. I've included the Entomb in Ysera to be able to withstand against a control deck, because a lot of decks, you know, once you hit the late game and if you max out at, let's say, Bookworm, you're kind of in a pickle because you have no Entomb, so you can't really take their big card, and you don't actually have a big dragon of your own unless you've Netherspite Historian it, and that's always a chance, right? So I always like to just throw in one big dragon, whether it's, you know, Ysera, Deathwing, Chromacus, Neff, just something in there. Like, for example, if you didn't have the Ysera. So yeah. So moving to Rogue, we have first the Tempo / what I call my random Rogue build. This deck was never really played by anyone, to be honest. I really don't care. I've heard some people say, you know, Tempo Rogue or Aggro Rogue has been around forever, and a lot of people played it. No, they didn't. I played this deck starting like 2 or 3 days after Mean Streets was out, and I hit Legend with it twice using my Tempo Rogue. Never really made the deck guide. Well, I made one deck guide, but we didn't really post it and promote it that much because I didn't want to play against the deck. Finally, the deck caught on. Some popular streamer started playing it, and now it's actually a mainstream deck. So Tempo Rogue is now a thing, and the build is 1 or 2 cards off of my list, but it's totally acceptable. I never came up with the deck. The streamer's been playing it for 2 weeks. He definitely did. I'm not salty at all. So looking at the deck list, it runs very similar to any very fast-paced mid-range / aggressive base deck. It has the ability to burst damage with Cold Blood, so whether you're putting this on your Divine Shield minions, like Argent Squire, or you're putting it on the Argent Commander and or Leroy Jenkins to deal huge amounts of burst damage from charge minions. You can Abyss, which is really nice. It also runs the Pirate package. It also has the ability to get value with Swashbuckler and your Undercity Huckster along with Zeril. So there's just a lot going on in this deck, and it looks like kind of weird. Like, how would you actually win with it? But the basis is you have a minion to play every turn, and if you're not summoning a minion, you're making your minion stronger than your opponent. And all of your stuff is relatively cheap, so you're always going to be able to just kind of maximize your mana for that turn. And you don't have to make the game last long when you have 4 or 5 minions on the board by turn, 4 or 5, and they can't kill them because you've buffed them with Defender of Argus. You've dealt huge damage with, of course, your Cold Bloods. They have Divine Shield on these minions with your Horse Rider and Argent Squire, so they can't kill them right away with like a Ping or just like a Living Roots or a Wrath. So there's just a lot going on, and overall, deck's really powerful. A little bit different to play than, like, let's say an Aggro Shaman, because you have to count on getting cards from your opponent's class more so than just being able to, you know, double Lava Burst, double Lightning Bolt, Jade Lightning, and all that shenanigans, because you only have 2 Abysses in the deck. But they kind of makes up for that by having charges. But either way, super fun deck, and I'm glad to actually see it in, like, mainstream. The next one's going to be the Miracle Rogue. I'm not going to talk about this deck too long because, as we know, the deck is going to change when Conceal leaves at the end of the next rotation. Plus, this deck has been around in forever, but the basis is in the early game, you're just trying to survive with playing Small-Time Buccaneer, Swashbuckler, maybe get out a big Van Cleef or play the SI Agent, Tomb Pillager. My particular list doesn't run Questing Adventure because I don't like the card, but of course, feel free to take out the double SI and put in the Questing Adventure like every other Miracle Rogue player. And then from there, you win through playing Gadgets and Auctioneer, a bunch of cheap spells. You make your minions huge with Cold Bloods and just deal crazy amounts of damage. And then you say, I play Conceal. And then your opponent can't react to your board. It's invisible. And then they lose the next turn because they can't take, 15 plus damage 2 turns in a row. So there's Miracle in a nutshell. Moving to Shaman, there's actually quite a few Shaman lists out right now. The first I'm going to discuss is going to be the Jade Shaman. This is actually my most recent Jade Shaman build with the double Water Speaker, 1 Bloodlust, Wide Eyes with 1 Devolve, which has come in clutch so many times. So this follows, I want to simplify it and to make it this not so long. This follows the same exact path as Druid, but instead of being able to have infinite value, you sacrifice the infinite value and the ability, or not the ability, but the Druid slowness to make the deck faster. So you're playing basically the same type of, summoning your Jades, wanting to overwhelm your opponent eventually, but you sacrifice, the infinite value with giving up Jade Idol and the cards being slower with much faster cards, but you just don't have the ability to last forever. But I've included Bloodlust because I find in this deck that most of the time your opponent won't want to deal with your board because they know, your Jade Essence or your Jade Spirit only, is a 2/3 and then it summons a 2/2 or a 3/3, and then your totems really don't do much damage, and they know you don't run the Thunder Bluff Valiant, so they're not really as worried about killing the totems. But then you whip out a Bloodlust with 4 or 5 creatures on the board, and all of a sudden you're pushing 12 to 15 burst damage. So that's why I have one of those in there. And overall, the deck's very powerful in my opinion. Moving to the next one is going to be the more control-based N'Zoth Control Shaman, which of course runs the Death Rattle package, and its entire early game is dependent on being able to Maelstrom, Elemental Destruction, Lightning Storm, and Doomsayer. This is, again, not a very popular Shaman list, but I can assume this list is going to become popular, and I've actually seen it a few times. Not as many as some of these other lists, but again, good to know. This is one of the decks that you might go against, and its whole late game package is, again, N'Zoth, and you stop this by merely being able to Hex or Polymorph your opponent's Death Rattles or kill them before they play N'Zoth. The next one's going to be the infamous Aggro Shaman, a class and deck banned in almost every single tournament since Mean Street's been released, and it's also, I want to say, just in about, you're going to play this deck probably just as much as you play against Pyro Warrior on ladder. Maybe not so much anymore because of the Small-Time Buccaneer nerf, but still, I'm sure the deck is going to be played. It uses very cheap, efficient minions, great spells, and field synergy with Flame Tongue Totem, and 4-drop 7/7 to overwhelm you in the early game and kill you before you can really get anything situated and started. This is one of those decks by, turn 5 or 6, you're dead, and Druid never even got to play. They're like a Jade Behemoth, right? It's just, this deck is way faster with the Jades and the overall Lava Burst, Jade, Lightning, and Lightning Bolt package. Moving to Warlock, we have basically the only Warlock deck that you're going to see on ladder, and that's going to be the Reno Warlock deck. Again, with the Reno decks, they're going to follow the same kind of path, and you'll find that the playstyle is different between the Priest, the Mage, and the Warlock, but there's of course the similarities with it being Reno, Brand. It's going to run, again, Cabal, Courier, and all those kind of one-of cards that you're going to find in basically every Reno deck, but there's just slight differences. You know, instead of Flame Strike, you have Twisting Nether. Instead of the Archmage and Alexstrasza, you have like a Lord Jaraxxus. So there's just minor, I don't want to say minor because there is a big difference between the cards, but you can kind of like, oh, in the Mage, what's the big field clear? Flame Strike. Okay, what's 1 mana more and is in the other Reno deck? Twisting Nether. Okay, what's the big drop in Mage? Alexstrasza. What's the big drop in Warlock? Jaraxxus. So again, very control-based deck. Not so much looking to fatigue you, but merely play, you know, relatively decent-sized minions. But this particular deck, unlike the Mage does have burst potential if you're running the, like, more spell-oriented with Frost, or Ice Lance, Frost Novas, and, you know, the burst package, basically. The Frost Nova's not in the burst package. I was just thinking Freeze with the Ice Lance. But either way, this has the Leroy Jenkins Power Overwhelming Faceless Manipulator combo, which I think is going to become, again, more popular, and it's probably split between 50-50, those just playing, you know, the Jaraxxus outvalue your opponent package versus the combo package with Leroy. But I think the Leroy package does have a little bit more reach as of now. If you play against, you know, some of these Jade decks that, you know, when you get them down to around that 20 HP, which is not that hard, they either play around Leroy in the combo and it makes them basically all their other plays pretty inefficient, or they don't play around it and then they just lose. So I guess that would be an advantage that the Warlock deck does have. Moving to the Warrior has the most decks out of all of the classes that we've gone, and that is just because the diversity that we've seen with all of the cards and what you are and unable to do, are and aren't able to do. But it's pretty cool that you can build a very fast-paced Warrior deck and it's good. You can build a mid-range Warrior deck and it's good, and you can build a control Warrior deck and it's good. All of like the kind of sub-archetypes within the Warrior are good, which I think is pretty healthy for the class overall. Unfortunately, not every class can be that good. I don't even want to say good, but have the variety of being able to play whatever kind of deck you want at the moment. So the first one we're going to take a look at is the Dragon Pirate Tempo Warrior. This deck was once one of the best decks on ladder, seen all of the time, and then it kind of died down, and now it's kind of popping back up. And that's the reason that the early game has been enhanced by Small Time Buccaneer and, of course, Patches the Pirate, which now synergizes well with N'Zoth's First Mate. Before, they'd play like 2 N'Zoth's First Mate, and then you really have nothing past then. It was just decent early game. But now you actually have that 1/3 weapon can help your Small Time. It summons the Patches. You got a lot of good stuff going on. Also from there, this deck basically curves out exceedingly well with having a strong minion that needs to be dealt with every turn. And if your opponent doesn't deal with it, you're going to be able to just continuously summon very high-statted, powerful creatures for the particular mana cost. So Fierce Monkey, Frothing Berserker, if left unchecked, will win you games on its own. The Elite, a 4/3 with charge, does damage face. Twilight Guardian, a 3/6 for 4 mana, huge value. Blackwing Corruptor, you know, a 5/4 for 5 that deals 3 damage. We have 2 Crushers in here, which means if your opponent is below 15 health, it becomes a 9/9, so you basically win a turn or 2 right after this guy's played. The Curator to keep the draw rolling, and then the Hellscream and the Deathwing to finish up the game. I know this deck looks like, oh my god, there's so many like high drops in the deck, but in actuality, there's really not that many in comparison to some other of the control decks on ladder. You'll find that you curve out exceedingly well in this particular deck. The next list is going to be the infamous Pirate Warrior. I've built it a little bit different. There's 2 versions of Pirate Warrior, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the inner workings of the Pirate Warrior class. Unfortunately, this little side thing is annoying the hell out of me with the green screen, and I have to fix it before I continue on. I've been staring at it for a while now, and I'm like, how do I fix this blur thing? And I'm just going to take care of it there. I'm sorry for those of you who've been dying throughout the video. Like, Rob, fix that little black bitch. So I gone ahead and I've taken care of it for you. So there's actually 2 types of Pirate Warrior, and you always think, oh, there's just one, it always just goes face, and I don't like it very much. But there's actually two. There's a minion heavy version, which depends on, of course, minions to deal the extra damage to the deck, and then there's a spell heavy version, which has a ton of burst, but doesn't have the like higher quality minions to follow up. So I'm showing you currently the minion version, where it runs, of course, the South Sea Captain and the Naga Corsair along with the Sky Captain Crag. You have synergies within the creatures. You don't have the burst with heroic strikes and things of that nature. The reason Captain Crag is in there is because, again, these deck lists are mine, and I found that it kind of flows better with the Pirates and Leroy. Plus, I like the guy. It just works. But if you want to run Leroy, you're more than welcome to. I just can't get over a pirate riding a parrot. That's just too much for me. So we're going to be taking a look at the burst heavy one now. Again, it doesn't run the pirate buffer. It doesn't run the Naga Corsair, which works really well with Nazas first mate. It has the heroic strike. It's much quicker. It has the double deckhand instead of just the one. You could be like, Rob, I don't know which one to play. You can play either one. It's up to you. They play a little bit differently from one another. One, again, depends more on your creatures and being able to, like, let's say you're playing against a Reno and you're playing this particular deck, the burst version. You don't have to worry about overextending into like a blizzard or a volcanic potion, because a lot of your stuff comes with just burst. Heroic strike has divine shield, horse rider. You don't have to worry about as much. But like the minion heavy version, instead of heroic strikes and things like that, you actually have to worry about field clear, because a lot of, again, your damage comes from the minions being able to stay alive. So just keep that in mind. There's just two different rounds, but the minion one is better in the mirror matchup because you can actually kill the other Pirate Warrior's minions. They can't do any damage. You have board control. As we know, other aggro decks don't have any field clear, and you can win that way. So there are pros and cons of each deck, and I would probably test both to see which one you like best, if Pirate Warrior is your thing. The last warrior deck we're going to talk about is the Control Warrior. I actually just got done making a guide on this, so if you'd like a greater in-depth detailed description of what the fuck is going on with this deck, I'd be more than happy to provide you with that there somewhere. And the deck actually does aim to fatigue you and make you run out of steam, and it does that through, of course, the double Gore Howl, the double Brawl, the Ally Armor Smith. And if it ever reaches to the end of the game and you just seem to run out of resources, we have Elise Starseeker in the deck, which basically puts the map, which puts the Golden Monkey, and when you play the Golden Monkey, it turns all of your remaining cards into random legendary minions, which most of the time they're pretty valuable and will be able to outvalue any other deck, because just playing legendary after legendary after legendary, as we know, most of them are pretty big, and your opponent only has so many tools to get rid of cards, and by the end of the game they've probably used an exceeding amount of them on your current already the cards that you've played in your deck. So to deal with a whole entire deck full of legendaries is craziness. But with that wraps up our most popular decks of the month. Also a quick note, I was going to say the Control Warrior, not as popular as, of course, the Dragon Tempo and the Pirate being the most popular, followed by the Dragon Tempo, followed then by the Control Warrior. So I just kind of wanted to put them in a list there. But if you enjoyed the video or and you want to add on to it in any way, shape, or form, feel free to do that in the comment section below. Also, if I happen to miss out on anything or you'd like to elaborate on some of the stuff that I've said, again, I can only give so much information in X amount of time, and I don't want these videos to be like 4 hours long of me just rambling, saying every matchup, everything you need to look for. A kind of brief description of each. The deck guide's there to explain further, and the comment section is for those players wanting to elaborate on anything I've said or just chime in to whatever they feel like. It's always nice reading comments. So with that said, hopefully you've enjoyed, and I'll see you next month for the next monthly meta / most popular decks. As always, I'm Warshak, and happy whatever the hell day it is.